pleasure for me today to introduce our speaker. Lisa Pickett is her name, and she's the wife of our son, and she's the daughter of Arafune, who's also a member of our club. So I've known Lisa quite a while. Lisa went to Harrison High School, graduated from Purdue, twice actually. She has a master's degree in international business from Krannert. She also has a degree from Budapest University. And she's a former aide to one of the representatives in the House of Representatives in Washington. She's a former director of federal relations for Purdue University. And now, I almost have to read this because it's a fairly long title. Her business card's about this size. She's the director of Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation. So, Lisa?
All right.
I'm going to juggle back and forth between the sides. I'll walk around behind you. Is that okay, John? All right. Well, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Arafune. Thank you very much for inviting me today to your weekly lunch program. So, as you know, my father-in-law, John Pickett, asked me to talk to you about what I do and why it is important. And then he wanted me to say something about STEM as well. You know, I really think that he asked me to do this because he has no idea what I do. And was hoping I could just put it into a PowerPoint presentation for him. But what I've actually decided to do is come and make a confession to you. I am a lobbyist. Not a dirty word. Not a dirty word. Oh, no. It doesn't change. Just provides
I'm going to grind this along.
it worked before.
That's pretty heavy.
How do I go to the next page? There we go. Okay. So why am I making this confession to you? And why would I actually confess to doing this? Because I really feel that there is no shame at being good at helping people achieve their goals. But why do I do this? Because I have learned how important it is to be at the table, to be a part of the decision-making process. I believe that the science mission of the United States is superior to that of others, and that we must continue to set high standards for others to meet. Our elected officials need to be reminded on a daily basis because they have other groups knocking on their door day after day after day. So as you can see, these are some of the agencies that I have interacted with over the years. I've had the honor of serving President Jischke, President Cordova, and President Daniels as Purdue's representative in Washington, D.C. I opened the Purdue office for Dr. Jischke, and I developed relationships with the Indiana Congressional Delegation, the Association of American Universities, and the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, as well as many more groups that are nonprofit, that are corporate, that are higher education, inside and outside of the Beltway. Also, while I was doing that, I discovered this interesting niche of science policy and science funding. I became a part of the science community in Washington, D.C. I am not a scientist in the technical sense, as that I did not earn a degree in the STEM field. I have bachelor's and master's degrees in management from Purdue. But I love the concept of curiosity, of creating new concepts in science, new fundamental knowledge, understanding nature, and so on. So I discovered that I can participate in the scientific process by helping science to have a voice. I can be a person of influence. So I found that the path of my career is anything but linear. As an undergraduate, I happened across an advertisement in the Purdue Exponent for a competitive internship in the Indiana State Senate. I found myself working alongside Senate Majority Leader Joe Harrison and freshman Senator Luke Kenley. I was eventually living in Washington, D.C. and worked for Congressman Dan Burton of Indiana's 5th and 6th districts when he was chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, known as GROC. I worked as chief clerk on the committee during the Clinton investigation years, where I met many interesting personalities: Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Senator Bob Dole, actress Jane Seymour, blogger and journalist Matt Drudge. Does anybody read the Drudge Report? Yeah. He actually signed my copy of the investigation that I have. Then, eventually I came back to campus. I worked in financial aid and engineering, and then I opened the office for Purdue in Washington, D.C. After 13 years as a Purdue employee, I eventually had the calling to hang my own shingle, and now I have the great joy of running my own business, working from home while traveling and enjoying activities with my children. My company specializes in advocating for science and technology in Washington, D.C. So you might be wondering, so what is lobbying? It's really a person who tries to influence legislation, policy, or strategy. So raise your hand if you've ever visited with a member of Congress. Yeah, I knew that would be the case. Did you talk about something that is important to you or to your family or to your community?
Yeah.
All right, you are all lobbyists. So this is a picture of me with a group representing the Society of Women Engineers on Capitol Hill for their Fly-In Day. We are at Senator Ben Cardin's office. So with a group like this, I'll usually make 3 to 6 congressional visits in a day, House and Senate side. Sometimes we just visit the personal offices. Sometimes we also visit with committee offices like the Science Committee or the Appropriations Committee, the committees where people come together and talk about legislation. I estimate that in my career, I've probably made 2,000 to 3,000 congressional visits. And if you were wondering where the word lobbyist came from, I prefer to believe it is the second definition of it, that it is the lobby off the floor of the House. If you have taken a House tour, you've probably seen it. Well, I guess before 9/11 you would have seen it. I don't think they show it anymore to the public. But it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, there's the tile work inside the House and the Senate, inside the Capitol building is just amazing. So, how does effective lobbying work? There's relationships and networking and relationships, and you bring in resource experts like faculty members from Purdue, you develop relationships, and you actually tell real stories, because people remember real stories, and then you have relationships. Oh, yeah, did I mention that relationships are important? They're important. And you probably hear a lot about money in DC. Sure, money is important, money helps. It gives you access to after-hours events, other networking events, trips, golfing events, those kinds of things. But I've never had access to money. I've never had PAC money. PAC is a political action committee. Corporations have it, some groups have it, some people set them up, they've got it. But generally, a nonprofit educational institution does not have any kind of money to spend for that. So I get creative. I go to free or nearly free events. I get my friends to comp me. Did I say relationships? I have relationships with friends who do have PAC money, and when they do have a fundraiser, if it's something I want to go to, I'll say, can you comp me to go? And it's usually, sure, come along. That's how you go to events, and you get to meet with people outside of the office. In all seriousness, every possible group that you can think of has some kind of activity in DC. Not everyone has a DC office, but many groups will conduct fly-ins throughout the year. And a fly-in is exactly what it sounds like. You fly in, you have your meetings, and you fly back out. My favorite fly-in is with the Greater Lafayette Commerce Group. I really enjoy seeing Aaron Easter, both of your mayors, Joe Wade with Visit Lafayette, Tom Murtaugh. I mean, they're all a great group of folks, and they are doing great things for Tippecanoe County. And you may not realize, but these folks that do this fly-in for you, they are paying for it out of their own pockets. The city doesn't pay for it, taxpayers don't pay for it, they pay for it because they know that the discussion that they have in DC will have direct impact on the quality of life and for future economic development for Greater Lafayette and for Tippecanoe County. So, as you know, President Trump was elected in November, and the incoming president has what's called transition teams and landing parties for the various agencies. And these are generally people who are adept at or knowledgeable about an agency's mission, people who support the incoming administration. They are sent to the agencies to represent that incoming administration and prepare for a new secretary or director. The science community became concerned at the lack of a landing party for the usual science agencies. And then we started to read really scary articles about potential funding cuts, office eliminations, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the groups I'm involved in became really active. I work as the director for the Coalition for the Academic Scientific Computation. Essentially, it's a professional science society for 85 academic supercomputing centers. I hope you've seen the brochure that I produce. I do produce this. And in the back, you can see the list of 85 members. And in the front, you will see this beautiful simulation that was produced by Purdue University's High Performance Computing Center. They won our cover contest in 2017. So as the CASC representative to this group called US CASC, a group of industry giants in the national labs, I act as the academic representative to this group. We talk about exascale computing. Exascale computing is essentially computing power that is 50 times faster than the nation's supercomputers in use today. So we were expecting the worst for funding for this program called ASCR. ASCR is the Advanced Scientific Computing Research Program at the Department of Energy. We leapt into action. So what was the result of our action? Apparently, we are the only science program not to lose funding in the president's budget request. Seriously. If you were to review the entire president's budget request, which is a huge, huge book, you would see the terms funding below enacted or elimination just all over the place. However, our ASCR program in the Department of Energy actually saw an 11.6% increase over the previous year's level for a proposed budget of $722 million, up from the previous year of $647 million. So I'll let you think about that for just a second. We were the only program of any scientific merit that received an increase of 11.6%. So how in the world did that happen? Well, there was a plan, there was some action, but there was really a lot of magic and luck. We were able to meet with staff with Speaker Paul Ryan's office at the end of February. She said that we were the only group to have requested an audience with the Speaker's office so far. And that was just really odd. We just couldn't understand why nobody else had been in that office asking for what they wanted for their programs. Then we sent the national lab directors in to have several meetings on Capitol Hill in March and April. And then we were not invited to give spoken testimony, but we provided written testimony as an outside witness to the House Appropriations hearings. If you are familiar at all with federal funding, appropriations is an extraordinarily important committee to get any kind of money whatsoever. We then had more Hill meetings with various leadership, committee leadership, House and Senate leadership in mid-May, and then the president's budget request was released in late May. We were stunned. So at a very recent House hearing with Secretary Perry, the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee stated, "Your proposal for the department also takes great strides to deliver our exascale computing system." He actually said this. "This is an area where the United States is losing ground to China and others. I agree, we must take back American primacy in computing science. The United States has directly invested heavily in scientific research. This work has produced dramatic scientific breakthroughs and innovation, and in the process has created high-quality jobs for Americans. Wow. So, ta-da! Any success?
Yeah.
You know? However, we do know that this budget will just get torn up, rewritten by the House, rewritten by the Senate, and anything could happen from here on out. However, I feel like we have a step in the right direction. And so we're hoping that something similar to what we have seen so far will get signed in the Oval Office this fall. So that was an example of lobbying success for an amazing, amazing computer program. I now want to round out our discussion with a few quick thoughts that I have on STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and math. It's a really hot topic. Everyone talks about it, but there are a couple of things that I haven't really heard mentioned when people talk about STEM. In K through 12 education, who is STEM specialized programming for? Who is it that we're aiming it for? I always just assumed it was for our best and our brightest students, the ones that are most likely to go on to college and get degrees in science and technology and math. I figured they were going to be our master's students, our PhD students. That's who I thought STEM was for. But I had someone point out to me that, well, isn't it kind of important that a lot of other people have access to STEM too? Does it have to be the best and the brightest? Computers are a big part of our everyday lives. Shouldn't we all get to know a little more about them and how they work? Have any of you used Scratch? It's a program that's developed by MIT students. It's for anybody to learn computer programming. My son has started on a computer programming course using Scratch, and we watched a TED Talk. If you're familiar with TED Talks, they're the cute little 20-minute talks about an interesting subject. The presenter was talking about his 83-year-old mother. She made a Scratch birthday card for him, and he was very impressed. Anybody can do it. So our kids that are going to the vocational studies, they do also need to know a lot about computers and programming. That's what manufacturing is these days. Basic police work, they need to have a sophisticated understanding of forensic science too. So I personally have had a complete internal shift, and I now believe that our STEM program should be for any student who wishes to study them in depth. And since I have the luxury of having my own business, I spend my professional development money attending technical and computing conferences. I especially enjoy conferences for women in the computing field. Every Silicon Valley company is desperate to show that they have any women working for them, any VPs, any chief operating officers, any chief C-suite officers at all that are women. They send founders to these computing conferences. I get access to people of companies that you've heard of, that you've seen advertisements for, products that you buy. Last week, when I was in San Francisco for a computing conference, I met Lisa Jackson. She is the Vice President for Environment at Apple. I had her autograph my phone because I was so excited that I met the actual VP from a product, because I love touching my products. There, just autographed that for me. She was a little surprised, but I felt it was appropriate. So then at these conferences, I noticed that the colleges and the universities that we talk about are always those top-tier research universities, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Purdue, the universities that you've heard of. But you have to remember that these universities only make up 2% of all four-year colleges, and they still award 40% of the degrees that are offered in the United States. So we're barely touching the greater population of this country, those that could really use the income that are generated by STEM-based education. We don't mention it, we don't think about it, we don't think about all those other options that are out there, and those amazing computing conferences leave a whole portion of the population behind. Also, you need to remember that tech is not the same as engineering. It doesn't require a STEM degree. Anybody can learn how to code and call yourself that you're in tech. But if you're an engineer, we do like it if you have an engineering degree and have had the concepts trained to you at a university. So that's the difference between tech and engineering. They're not the same thing. When they ask for more women engineers to work in Silicon Valley companies, that's not what they're trying to say. They're trying to say more women in tech. Also, I have the pleasure of attending the National Science Board meetings at the National Science Foundation on a regular basis. I've really enjoyed getting to know many of the board members, and Victor McCrary is a recently appointed new member of the board. He comes from an HBCU. That's a historically black college or university. It's Morgan State University in Baltimore. He wants to talk about STEM in a totally different way, back to the manufacturing way, the workforce. So since his presentation, the board has taken action, and they've decided to have some listening sessions around the country. They're going to be starting with Louisiana in October. And I really think that Indiana should host one too, because we are a strong manufacturing state. So in summary, just wanted to leave to your attention that our elected officials need to know what you're thinking about. You vote. You should tell them what you think and where we should be spending our money. And you have to remind them. And those occasional lobbying wins are really great. They're very rare. And we do need to keep expanding our STEM literate workforce. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. And here's a small token of our gratitude for your doing this.
Thank you.
Back to Jim.
Well, how about a Q&A?
Any
We have
questions?
time.
Any questions?
I think it's really cool that you have your own job doing something really cool.
Thank you. I really enjoy it too. Yes.
I read a while back that China funds more research, the government funds more research, academic research, than the United States does it just this year. It obviously doesn't bother anybody in the administration. Does it bother people in Congress?
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Secretary Perry and the Chairman Frylinghausen are aware of it. We bring it to their attention over and over again. But when you think about China and the volume of money they spend, when you take it down to the per capita level, it's still pennies on what we spend. So we're still doing well, but it's just the volume of money that we're spending is not as great. And also the increase in spending is essentially we're losing ground, because we keep cutting back on spending for science, which I truly believe is the economic driver for this country, and it also keeps us ahead. I mentioned that, well, I guess in the chairman's remarks, he said something about that China is ahead of us. There's what's called the top 500, which is the 500 fastest supercomputers in the world. And, you know, in the past, the U.S. has dominated the list, always been in the top 10, that kind of thing. For the first time, just announced last week, but only the second time in history, has the United States not been in the top 3 fastest supercomputers in the world. And there are lots of uses for supercomputers, including national defense, nuclear simulations, those kinds of things that are very, very important to the actual defense of our country, which is part of the reason, honestly, that the funding for the Exascale project has been positive. Because it is directly tied to national defense, the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, it is tied to that as well. But what's happening in China is that they're also building their own chips, and so they are taking and copying chips and not having to buy from U.S. companies. Intel, what's going to happen when China decides to cut the price of the chips in half and everybody starts using those chips in their computers? And what happens when we start putting those in our supercomputers and they have malware in them and they can see what we're actually processing, or they can change what we're processing so we get the wrong results for our nuclear simulations or our design or any of that. So that's why it's really, really important that we keep development and production of chips and lots of computing products in the United States so that we have control of what's in there. Yes?
So from your experience in Washington, what would you say are the biggest factors pushing drive away from science funding that you notice?
So much competition. I hate to bring it up, but Medicare, Social Security funding is eating up the pie. The pie can only grow so fast, but the portions of the pie are getting smaller and smaller. So those of us that need to access discretionary funding, which is the funding that you can choose to spend how you want, that portion is getting smaller and smaller. So that's what's driving. Yes.
I'm concerned about all the computer hacking going on
Sure.
around the world. It looks to me like there'd be a great need for training people in anti-hacking.
Sure,
What do you call that?
absolutely. I didn't bring my computer specialist with me, that's my husband, and he specializes in the anti-hacking stuff. He was actually a recipient of the National Science Foundation Fellowship Award, which provided for his master's study at Carnegie Mellon University in computer security. That is still a program that is alive and well at the National Science Foundation, currently still funded. When that funding pot becomes smaller and smaller, they can fund fewer and fewer students to go study computer security at these great universities and learning the best. So that, I'm sorry, take a step back. After he completed his degree, part of the requirement of the fellowship is that he goes back and works for the government for a number of years. And he did. He provided great service back to the country. And each of these students that receive that fellowship, they do come back and they work for the United States government and help do things. I mean, there are a lot of things that we don't hear about, and I have no clue what they are either. But they are providing that service back to this country. So that's another way that our federal funds, our taxpayer dollars, the pennies that disappear from our paychecks, they're going to fund projects like that as well. Yes?
Yeah, a question to talk about pennies disappearing. As you notice, majority of us are all retirees or
Yes.
right in that age range, okay? What about AARP? What have you noticed with them? Are they influential for us in Washington, D.C. for our Social Security, Medicare, or what?
Yes, absolutely. They are very good. I would have to say that there are several associations, coalitions that are really, really good in DC, and they also have deep pockets. AARP, I don't know if you as members can submit dollars for their PACs and that kind of thing. They have a PAC, and I know that they go out and spend it, and that they go to a lot of things, and it buys you access, and it's part of how it works.
Okay. Glad to hear it. Good.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you, Lisa. That was awesome.